We are live. And I wanted to welcome everyone to the joint co-chairs meeting for all four of the subcommittees. And I wanted to just briefly introduce Julie Pittman. She is the special advisor to educator engagement for the Office of the State Superintendent, and she will be providing us with a wonderful presentation about the teacher feedback sessions that everyone has been talking about or mentioning in their subcommittees around what she has found feedback-wise from those teachers across the state. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes, it looks good.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to come and talk to you about the work that we've been doing to begin the process for gathering teacher feedback on all of the work that you all have been doing. So I thought I'd talk you through the process first. From April 1st until May 13th, I and some others spent some time talking with teachers in districts across the state, face-to-face, gathering some feedback, stories, questions, and concerns so that we could begin to sort of frame out the way that we would have these discussions in later May. I worked with Dr. Jenny Korn, the Director of Research and Evaluation, to help develop questions and data collection pathways for the feedback sessions, and also worked with the digital teaching and learning team to build a virtual platform for the feedback meetings. And then we did some test sessions so that we could get some feedback on the process to make sure it was seamless when we started having teachers engage in the work. We worked to identify teacher participants for this first round of feedback sessions. We selected the 2021 and 2022 District Teachers of the Year, the Charter School Teachers of the Year, and the North Carolina Virtual School Teachers of the Year. The 2019, 2020, and 2022 Beginning Teacher of the Year regional finalists, and then asked each superintendent in every district to designate 2 additional teachers to round out their district participants. We also asked for 3 designees from each of the lab schools and 2 teacher candidate designees from each of the schools of education. So the invitation went out to a little over 500 participants. And we had earlier when we were doing the face-to-face sessions that were around a multitude of topics, but this was part of it. We talked with about a little over 200 people in preparation for this work. So when we sent the invitation to the teachers for their regional or group meetings, we sent out a video that you have a link to in this PowerPoint presentation that Tom Tomerlin worked with the comms team to develop so that everyone would have a frame of reference when we started the discussions online. And all of the meetings in the last 2 weeks have been virtual meetings so that teachers could have the easiest path to be able to participate. We wanted to be able to gather information around 3 big questions. What are teachers' perceptions about North Carolina's proposed new plan for teacher licensure? What are solutions that would address teachers' concerns? What are teachers' recommendations for teacher licensure reform? And so we asked them in the opening few minutes to really identify their 5 biggest concerns that they had heard from teacher colleagues around the plan. And these 6 rose to the top with more than 40% people. They could select as many as they wanted. So the 6 that rose to the top were starting with basing compensation on EVOS or growth as a huge concern. Creating a culture of competitiveness was second. Attracting teachers to the hardest to staff schools, like low-performing schools or under-resourced schools, was third. The fact that national board certification or master's pay that currently exists under statute would be impacted by this. Overall lower pay for teachers, and basing compensation on the practical educator evidence review. Then asked them to agree or strongly agree, they had no comment, or disagree or strongly disagree, based on their current understanding of the licensure plan, their level of agreement on these statements. So the current licensure process and compensation schedule needs reform. 80% agreed or strongly agreed. I have a good understanding of the proposed teacher licensure plan. 58% agreed or strongly agreed. I'm concerned about some of the components proposed in the proposed teacher licensure plan. 79% agreed or strongly agreed. Teachers should be compensated solely based on years of experience. 20% agreed or strongly agreed. And teachers should also be compensated based on various performance indicators. 57% agreed or strongly agreed. So the big questions that we got from teachers at the beginning of each session really circled around three big ideas. Why is this reform necessary, and why does it include both licensure and compensation? Two very different things that are being tied together. Why is this the time to do the work during one of the most difficult times in the lives of teachers and schools, especially after coming through these years of uncertainty during COVID? And how will this improve the education system? We began the conversation by really hearkening back to the West Ed recommendations that says the state will create a system of teacher development and recruitment that ensures each classroom a high-quality teacher who is supported with early and ongoing professional learning and provided competitive pay. And we talked about how in that one statement, each of the 4 subcommittees can really find their charge. And then we talked about the recent Huntley Commission recommendations that included a recommendation to expand the advanced teaching roles pilot to enable outstanding educators to extend their reach to more students without leaving the classroom, to recognize teacher leaders with higher compensation, to improve professional development for developing teachers, and that the collective responsibility was to support teachers as they advance through providing career pathways, developing teachers so they're prepared to assume new and more challenging roles over time, to design new roles with development opportunities, to build a workforce that is both excellent and diverse, to ensure all teachers are encouraged to have opportunities to pursue advanced roles, to set targets for different teachers pursuing advanced roles, and to be intentional in their outreach efforts. And then we asked teachers to indicate how they currently are able to renew their license in North Carolina. And by and large, we got the same responses, that you had to complete CEUs or professional development, you had to do have some evaluations, and you had to be in the classroom currently teaching. And then we asked them if that effectively captures who they are as an educator and the work that they do in their classrooms. And most everyone said no, or some version of no. And then we posed this question: if you could tell the story of your teaching and how you affect each student, how they've grown, how you've grown, and the potential you all have for what comes next, what would that take? And this is these things were what rose to the top. You can see that multiple data points was being the largest indicator here was what we heard the most of. We have several things like teaching videos, peer evaluation, student data, student surveys, formative and summative assessments, PD implementation, awards, goals, and parent letters, instructional coach observations, and a wide variety of other things that really sort of fall into these particular types of buckets. And we were asked in the last Advancement and Development Subcommittee if we could take this model, this infographic, and see if it was able to be better understood in the field than the previous iteration of the infographic. And we were able to spend some time talking through how, if you look at this model and your eyes float to the center, you see that License 4 is the professional license for teachers. So currently practicing teachers who have a clear license would fall into that License 4 area. And then if you work backwards and you finish the EPP pathway, you would fall into the License 3 with 3 years of beginning teacher and wraparound support. If you came in through a couple of different alternative pathways, you would come into License 2 or License 1, depending on your experience level, and have different levels of support from an adult leader, mentor, or coach during that, and then backwards to the apprentice for folks who have an associate's degree, who are possibly pursuing TA to teacher or student teaching, to be able to have intensive support with co-teaching, and the ability to have some assistance in gaining the necessary functions to be able to move through License 1 and 2 and into License 4. And then we looked at how the classroom leader and the adult leader positions are in fact that positions that offer opportunities to step either fully or partly outside of the classroom if you hold a License 4 and you have advanced credentials. So a classroom leader would be likened to an advanced teacher in an advanced teacher role or multi-classroom leader, and an adult leader would be concurrent with a coach, an instructional technology facilitator, a mentor, a BT coordinator, someone who's solely working with adults and not working in classrooms with students. And it's the same type of pathway that one would take if you were a classroom teacher and have your 4 years of teaching experience, and you decided to get an assistant principal add-on licensure and apply for an interview for a possible position in your district or in another district for an assistant principal position, or perhaps an opportunity that would arise either through the district office or what currently exists now with instructional coaches and the like. This definitely seemed to resonate better with teachers in understanding that these were opportunities for job positions that required a License 4, but were not the next step that would preclude certain people or others from going into it. We'll talk about the communication pieces around this a little bit later in this presentation. So the teacher feedback that we were able to get, we had several things, and pardon the ones when we sent this as a different version, it was in bullet form, not in multiple numbers of one. We asked them 4 main questions. What do you like about the new licensure framework? What are your concerns about the new licensure framework, and what suggestions do you have for addressing those concerns? What is your biggest takeaway from your discussions today? And what was the most innovative solution or idea you heard or thought about today? And it could be around teacher concerns or about improving the model for supporting teachers. So this next slide has a lot on it, but we tried to really pick out what some of the major themes were so that you could digest some of these things today around these four questions. And I'd like to go through them to be able to honor the conversations that we had over the last 2 weeks. Around what we liked was increased opportunities for teacher leadership without pursuing administrative roles. That definitely around the support for teachers, lots of conversation around PD accounts to fund professional development. Definitely increase pay at all levels, and agency for teachers to be able to decide how they show effectiveness, as well as multiple pathways for people entering into the profession. Their concerns were vast. And still, we left every meeting with people with still major questions. That there might be competition among colleagues to attain those advanced leadership opportunities. And while we talked about the competition should not be different than it is for someone who's pursuing an administrative role, it still feels different to teachers. And I think there needs to be some intentional conversation around that in order to flush that out and address that. Equity concerns around the teacher leader selection process, evaluation bias, student surveys, and limited options for some populations to demonstrate effectiveness. We did share some sample student survey questions, and there's still questions specifically around how that might be rolled out to younger students. Increased workloads for teachers trying to show effectiveness in once they reach at any level, but especially in License 4. Compensation that doesn't address the cost of living increases as it goes forward. Are we really keeping the best teachers in the classroom with this model if we're asking our best teachers to take on advanced roles? And how can accomplished teachers not interested in leadership roles earn more pay by simply being highly effective? How will teachers from other states and military families or other questions around this be accounted for in this model? And how will the Family Medical Leave Act or breaks in service affect someone's licensure? Our biggest takeaways from the discussions, someone said, I better understand the intentions of the framework. The work being done with the new framework seems to support the work being done with the state's portrait of a graduate. There's clarification on compensation, like the $5,000 raise for 5 years in level 4, assurance to honor national board and advanced degrees. The creation of advanced roles will not impact teacher allocations based on ADM, and thus increasing class sizes, which is a huge concern for many, especially in younger grades, and that no one's pay will decrease, and advanced roles will be state supported, not locally created and supported. And while we really did not get a lot of solutions in this, we got a lot more questions than solutions. I believe the questions can possibly add to some of your work as you work towards creating those solutions. We did have a couple things rise to the top in a couple of meetings. Having more than one person conduct the evaluation on a teacher was important. Perhaps one in a building and one independent of the school or in a partnering or nearby school could help with that. And while that might create some additional burdens, definitely thinking about how the multiple observations could be addressed in this. And I think a huge question is to clarify who this plan will affect, especially non-teachers who are currently paid on the salary schedule or non-classroom teachers who are currently paid on the teacher salary schedule. So I've got several questions for each of the subcommittees. So for preparation and entry, how do we ensure this model does not create additional barriers? How do we clear the pathway for students to change to an education major while they're in their undergraduate years? Can we adapt previously successful alternative pathways like NC Teach? How will this model support recruiting a diverse teacher workforce? How will schools of education and community colleges adjust practices to support teacher candidates as this new framework is implemented? For licensure, how do we ensure evaluations and surveys are objective and provide actionable feedback to teachers? How will PD and CEUs look different in this model? How and who will determine where currently licensed teachers will land? There's also a compensation question that's attached to that. How do we ensure the renewal process does not generate significantly more work for teachers? How will licensure look for specialty teachers like EC, EL, arts, and PE teachers? Also, I would say for media specialists, school counselors, and other folks who might fall under the current licensure plan, how will they be affected under this? Which goes to the next question, who will fall under this licensure model? And please clarify the apprentice licensure term versus the contract length. There seemed to be some confusion about that. For advancement and development, how do teachers move from one licensure level to another? There's a lot of specific concern and clarification that needs to happen around qualifications, duties, and selection of classroom excellence and adult leadership roles. And specifically, how will these roles be different than the ones that currently exist in districts? How do we design a system that is easy to navigate? Who measures competencies for advancement, and who will determine if professional development selected meets the criteria to maintain a license? I would say an additional question to that is, how does teacher agency play into that so that teachers can determine the professional development that best meets their professional goals as well as the needs of their students in their classroom from year to year? But also without taking away from professional development that could support programs that are adopted by districts. How do we build, train, and support a culture of collaboration in this model? There's a lot of concern around competitiveness. Will teachers of special populations have the same growth opportunities as other teachers, like exceptional children's teachers? And what is the role of micro-credentials, and how will they be validated? For budget and compensation, how will the licensure model be funded? Is this a sustainable funding model? Will national board and grandfathered master's degree pay continue? Will advanced degrees be considered part of the compensation model? Why aren't we just increasing teacher pay across the board without requiring additional roles and responsibilities? How will the apprentice compensation adjust for student teaching? How does this ensure current teachers or future teachers will not lose or go backwards in pay? And have finance and human resources stakeholders given feedback? So I have several calls of action or calls to action. Specific on this slide is around time and purpose. Please define and clarify the timeline for each level of development. Right now, I would say we were in the proposed policy level. We also are getting feedback, but there'll be a time for that in the future as well. When it goes to legislation, that will be a different level of development. And then implementation is something that I think is misunderstood by the vast majority. And then the action. So right now, I think we've all fielded several questions about how can we be at this stage when there are only 2 more meetings of the subcommittees, and there needs to be a final model that's going to PEPSC at the end of the summer. And there's a lot of confusion over whether or not all of the details need to be pulled into this model or not. And I'd like to make this my strongest call to action, to please clarify what the timeline is and what each level is and why certain levels of detail need to be adhered to now, and then others need to be concerned with later. Second is define and clarify the necessity for addressing all 4 areas at once and how they apply to the greater needs within the system of education. So what are the problems and why is this the solution? Please identify the stakeholders and expectations for and from those stakeholders. And please identify who will be affected and not affected by this. Teachers, teacher candidates, media specialists, counselors, coaches, etc. Where do they fall and where do they not fall in this? So a call to action for the subcommittees. For licensure, please clarify the barriers that currently exist and how possible pathways addressed in this framework will work to resolve those. For preparation and entry, please address how schools of education and alternative agencies support teachers in traditional and alternative pathways, build professional development for all teachers, support growth for teachers throughout their careers, and align to state and federal goals. For advancement and development, please identify core competencies bridging license levels, account for advanced roles as separate positions requiring a license for, not as next steps in licensure. For budget and compensation, please clarify any hold harmless proposal, national board certification, and master's pay. Please address veterans teachers' concerns about where they fall in the licensure pay structure. And I've had several people ask if you could give some examples that would show how that would work in the current framework proposal. The call to action around communication. And possibly even also data that helped lead up to where we are right now. What data supports how this proposed model, including alternative pathways, support at every level of licensure advanced teacher roles, and how they will improve the recruitment, retention, and diversification of the workforce? How does this address the system of concerns and recommendations? I think there was lots of question around things that dealt with Leandro, Huntley, the West Ed report, accountability, stakeholders' concerns, etc. Clarify effectiveness measures. Will there just be one track to show effectiveness? Are you just going to be able to choose the evaluations, or could you have multiple effectiveness measures used over the course of 5 years? What is the summary of the QGR? What is a greater understanding of how EVAS will be used versus other identifiers? Lots of questions about other types of tests that might not be captured on EVAS, but that are either mandated or used in states or by the districts, or in the state or by the districts. And then consider advanced roles as advanced credential positions rather than next steps for licensure. There's confusion over license for and then the license for requirements. 4+ requirements. And finally, what data supports collaboration versus competition for this model? Please address evaluation instrument training and multiple observers to ensure equity. Please clarify who will evaluate and grant licensure. Will it be districts or DPI or a combination of both? Where has this been successful? And while I know there are not full states that have taken this over, there was lots of conversation about particular districts who have and why they did or did not work. And then lots of confusion over different types of language that is used when people are listening to the different subcommittee calls. Please use common, precise language across all 4 subcommittees, reports, and communication. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but before I do, wanted to make sure that you knew that at the end of this presentation, you also have the results from several of the polls that we used or from all of the polls that we used during the feedback sessions, so that you could see how those polls informed some of the work that I've presented for you today. So there were things around keeping things current as they apply to national board, master's pay, CEUs, around using national board certification for licensure requirement and pay, giving teachers the autonomy to be able to to select their professional development, to be able to give them the agency to do that so that it increases their trust and understanding of their own professionalism, that teachers can be able to understand how their students are improving, and finally, where people stand on how we need to support our beginning teachers, and where people stand on whether or not this is going to be able to provide more equitable systemic support for all teachers. You can certainly dig into that information a little bit more, but I put that there so you would have, and others listening would have, that information and the results that the teachers were able to give.
Thank you, Julie. This is Patrick Miller. Are there any questions from any of the folks on the WebEx? I'm sure there may be some, Julie, as folks digest this information. This is a lot to take in and process at one time, but it's extremely valuable information for us to consider as we continue to refine and develop the draft proposal. I'd like to thank you and Maureen for the incredible amount of work and time that you have put into this process to collect the feedback from teachers across the state. We appreciate it more than you know. Last call for questions for Julie.
Dr. Tomberlin has his hand raised.
Okay.
I don't necessarily have a question. I just wanted to reiterate, this is fantastic work, Julie. This is very important, and it's very good to have this kind of information. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And while the feedback that we got from teachers, as you can imagine, the numbers of teachers that we were able to talk was nowhere near comprehensive, but I do think it was at least geographically representative across the state. We could not capture every single word that was given to us during the feedback sessions. I feel like the spirit of people's concerns, questions, and ideas is represented in this report. I'm happy to dig into any of the information that we were able to receive with any of the subcommittee co-chairs or anyone on the subcommittees or PEPSC, and certainly anyone who's listening is welcome to contact me. My email address is on the screen, and I'm happy to answer questions and dig into any of that as we go further. I also would like to reiterate that we hope to continue to have more feedback sessions as this process is just getting started and moving into the next phase. I already have 2 scheduled with some different groups of folks who've reached out.
Thanks, Julie. We appreciate it. I see, Maureen, you're on the call. Is there anything you want to add from your perspective as you went through and helped facilitate these meetings?
No, I think Julie did a fantastic job of capturing what we learned from teachers during the feedback sessions. Thank you, Julie.
Excellent. All right. Well,
Dr. Miller, I actually do have a question. I want to make sure if that's okay.
Sure.
Julie and Maureen, I want to make sure I understand what I thought I heard. Teachers do recognize, or did they indicate overwhelmingly that they thought there should be reform in licensure and compensation?
The question that we asked them was if they could, what was their level of agreement over the current licensure process and compensation schedule, and does it need reforming? And we had an 80% response for agree or strongly agree. I would have to say that you would have to look at the fact that the statement pairs both licensure and compensation schedule together. And while I would only be guessing on this, I believe that most teachers believe the compensation schedule needs reforming, but we did pair that together in that statement.
Right, so we can't disentangle. They could have been responding in terms of compensation only and felt like the licensure system was okay.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
I will say, though, when we asked them about being able to tell their story of their effectiveness in their classroom versus fulfilling CEUs and paying a fee to get their license renewed, most people wanted to be able to use other things to tell the story of who they are, and that the license itself didn't do that. And while those are different, those are different ways to look at it, it does go to show that teachers know that their value and worth in their classroom and to their students and to their educational community is more than the license they hold.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you once again, Julie and Maureen and Kim. Unless there's any further business, we will adjourn.
No, that is all. Thank you. Everybody have a good holiday weekend.
Thank you, everyone.